They thought it would be a joke, setting up their lonely millionaire friend on a blind date with a deaf woman, just for laughs. But what started as a prank shattered every expectation, challenged every assumption, and unfolded into the kind of love story none of them saw coming. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The sun dipped low over the skyline of San Francisco, casting long golden shadows across the windows of the towering glass headquarters of Morgan Tech. Inside the executive office on the top floor, Edward Morgan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. Behind him, the soft hum of his office echoed with emptiness. Awards lined the sleek black shelves, plaques gleamed with recognition from Forbes, TechCrunch, and Entrepreneur magazine. He had built an empire from nothing, turned a single app idea into a billion-dollar company before the age of 35. On paper, Edward Morgan had it all. But as the sunset stained the sky orange and violet, all Edward felt was stillness, one that never left him. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message lit up from Damien. Another one bites the dust? Faced with tears of joy, come to the club tonight. We'll find you someone who doesn't know your net worth. Promise. He ignored it. Just last night, he had ended yet another relationship. Camille had been everything at first, beautiful, charming, worldly. But within 3 months, the signs began to show. The endless hints about vacations to Bali, her obsession with luxury brands, the expectation that he'd surprise her with shopping trips. And when he once suggested staying in for dinner, just the two of them, no fancy restaurants, no chauffeur, her disappointment had been palpable. Edward never confronted her. He just let her fade away like the rest. He wasn't bitter, just tired. Tired of being seen as a wallet with a heartbeat. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who could afford anything couldn't buy the one thing he truly wanted: love without a price tag. He turned from the window and sat on the leather chair behind his desk, the cool silence of the office pressing in. On the desk sat a small, framed photograph. Him and his two best friends, Damien and Carter, arms slung around each other's shoulders at a beach in Greece, all grinning like idiots. They'd met in college, dreamed together, built together. All three had made it to the top. Damien was now the CEO of a luxury hospitality brand. Carter ran a venture capital firm that backed half the startups in the city. They were his brothers in everything but blood. They laughed at his misadventures in dating, teasing him for being too romantic for a billionaire. But he knew they cared. Still, sometimes he wished they'd take it seriously. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock. His assistant, Mel, stepped in quietly. "Mr. Morgan, your driver's ready. Should I cancel dinner tonight?" He hesitated. "No, I'll go." She nodded. "Have a good night, sir." He left the office, descending in the private elevator to the underground parking where his black Bentley waited. As the city blurred past the tinted windows, Edward stared out at the lights, restaurants filled with couples, people laughing on the sidewalks. He tried to imagine what it would be like to go on a date and not have to guess someone's motives. To be chosen, not for his bank account, but for him. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Carter. "We've got something special planned for you tonight. Trust us. Just show up." He sighed. His friends were up to something. Probably another fix-up. Probably another disaster. But tonight he'd go. Not because he expected anything different, but because, just maybe, he hoped he was wrong. And maybe, just maybe, the universe was tired of playing games with his heart. The club they chose was upscale, exclusive, and dimly lit. The kind of place where the wealthy went to pretend they were just people. Plush velvet booths, chandeliers dripping in crystal, and live jazz music set the mood. In a private room nestled behind gold-beaded curtains, Damien and Carter sat sipping aged bourbon, grinning like two boys about to pull off the prank of the decade. Damien leaned forward, adjusting the hidden camera they'd discreetly planted in a vintage lamp fixture angled just right toward a reserved table near the front. He double-checked the feed on his phone. Perfect, he muttered. He won't even know. Carter chuckled, swirling his drink lazily. This is either going to be a disaster or a miracle. You mean a masterpiece, Damien corrected, raising a brow. Both men burst into quiet laughter. This wasn't cruelty, not in their minds. They loved Edward. They were just tired of watching him get chewed up by the same kind of woman, over and over. Women who saw the man, but only through the lens of what he could offer them. Yachts, private jets, custom jewelry, the works. So they decided to flip the script. They hadn't told Edward anything beyond. Show up, dress well, and don't ask questions. The date had been carefully arranged with the help of one of Carter's charity contacts. The woman's name was Lily Evans, mid-30s, gentle, intelligent, and profoundly deaf. She teaches sign language, Damien had said when they were first vetting her. Fluent, independent, doesn't give a damn about money. She's perfect, Carter agreed. Exactly the kind of woman Edward never meets. And yet, they hadn't told Edward she was deaf. That was the joke. Not on Lily, but on Edward, who always prided himself on understanding people. They thought it would be funny to watch him squirm, stumble, and stutter through the most uncomfortable date of his life. But deep down, they also wondered if maybe something real could come from it. As the clock approached 8 p.m., Carter tapped his phone and watched the entrance. He's here. Across the room, Edward entered. Wearing a charcoal gray suit that hugged his tall frame perfectly, he scanned the room with practiced detachment. He wasn't nervous. Edward Morgan never looked nervous. But inside, he was already bracing for disappointment. Some influencer with 200K followers looking for a ring and a Range Rover. Or worse, a starry-eyed 20-something who didn't even know what his company did. He hadn't even wanted to come. But Damien and Carter were insistent, and for once he thought, why not? A hostess approached him with a polite smile. Mr. Morgan, your guest is already seated. Right this way. He followed her through the maze of white linen tables, past glasses clinking and couples laughing softly. And then he saw her. She sat alone at a two-top table near the window, wearing a deep blue dress that complemented the tone of her skin and the sparkle in her eyes. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, minimal makeup, no flashy jewelry, just elegance in its quietest form. She looked up and smiled warmly, rising slightly from her seat. Edward returned the smile and offered a hand. Hi, I'm Edward. Lily smiled, nodded, and extended her hand too, but didn't speak. He waited. Still silence. Slightly puzzled, Edward pulled out his chair and sat. I wasn't given much detail about tonight. I guess we're both flying blind, he joked. Lily smiled again, soft, pleasant. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad and pen, scribbling quickly, then turning it to him. I'm deaf. Hope that's okay. He stared at the page, his stomach dipping. His eyes flicked up to hers, warm, open, calm. No awkwardness. No apology in her expression. Just quiet confidence. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. From the shadowed booth, Damien was trying not to laugh out loud. Oh man, Carter whispered. Look at his face. But Edward didn't panic. Instead, something sparked, an old memory, dusty but still alive. His childhood friend Jason, who had been partially deaf and whom he'd learned sign language for in middle school. He hadn't used it in years, but some of it came back. Slowly, he lifted his hands and signed awkwardly. I know a little. Slow. Lily's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Her smile widened. She nodded. Slowly. The date had officially begun, but not in the way anyone expected. And not in the way anyone, especially Damien and Carter, could have prepared for. Edward had been on hundreds of dates. 5-star dinners. Wine on rooftops. Yacht weekends. He had mastered the art of polite small talk, the subtle flirt, the knowing smirk. But tonight, sitting across from Lily, he felt like a teenager again, clumsy, uncertain, and strangely alive. She watched him with curiosity, her eyes alert and bright. Not judging. Not impatient. Just waiting. The jazz band in the corner struck up a slow rendition of an old Miles Davis tune. The vibrations of the bass gently pulsed through the floor beneath them. Lily tapped her fingers softly along the wood of the table in rhythm, sensing it more than hearing it. Edward attempted a sentence in sign. "You look beautiful tonight." His fingers were stiff, his motion unsure, but the meaning got through. Lily smiled warmly, then signed back slowly, clearly. "Thank you. You're doing well. Don't worry." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding and chuckled awkwardly. "I feel like I'm back in 7th grade, he said aloud, unsure if she could read his lips. She tilted her head slightly and nodded, as if to say, "You're not wrong." Edward reached for the notepad on the table, flipping it open. "My sign is rusty," he wrote, "but I want to get it right." She took the pen and replied, "It doesn't have to be perfect. Just honest." He stared at the words longer than necessary, then looked up. She was already smiling again. From the dim booth in the corner, Damien and Carter had grown quiet. Their phones, which moments ago were recording with mischievous glee, now rested on the table untouched. Carter leaned forward, squinting. "Is he signing?" he muttered. "Yeah," Damien replied slowly. "He is." They watched Edward and Lily pass the notepad back and forth, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent. Occasionally, she would teach him a new sign, patiently guiding his fingers. Once, he got it hilariously wrong, something about mistaking soup for bathroom. And they both laughed so hard a waiter passing by chuckled in sympathy, not even knowing the joke. The distance between them at the table had closed. Their body language mirrored one another. Something intangible was threading between them, quiet and magnetic. There was a moment when Lily signed something and Edward responded not with words, but by gently mimicking the sign with a small smile. It wasn't fluent, it wasn't perfect, but it was effort, and it was real. Lily reached over and lightly touched his hand. A quick touch, fleeting, but in it was trust. Edward blinked. This wasn't like any date he'd been on. There was no background noise to fill the gaps, no distractions. He had to pay attention, really see her. And strangely, for once, he wasn't exhausted by it. He was energized. Their dinner arrived, pan-seared halibut and grilled vegetables for him, a vegan risotto for her. She signed. "You didn't ask what I do." He laughed and signed back slowly. "Because I don't care what you do. I care who you are." She paused, expression softening. Then she signed something slowly, carefully, her fingers dancing with fluid grace. Edward watched, trying to decode it. She saw the confusion, smiled, and wrote on the notepad, "You're not like them." His eyebrows lifted. "Them." "The ones who pretend to listen." He sat back, swallowing the lump that formed in his throat. "Neither are you," he said softly, knowing she might catch the shape of the words. "You actually do listen, in ways most people don't." For a brief second, the air between them grew still, as if the world outside the restaurant had ceased moving. In the corner booth, Damien quietly put down his drink. "I don't think this is funny anymore," he muttered. Carter nodded, not breaking his gaze from the table. "No, this is something else." The waiter brought dessert menus, but Edward waved his off. He wasn't in the mood for food anymore. He just wanted to keep talking, or signing, or writing, or whatever it took, to this woman who had upended his expectations in less than an hour. He signed slowly. "Will you go out with me again?" Lily raised an eyebrow playfully, then signed back. "Only if you promise not to use Google Translate next time." They both laughed. As the date wound down, Edward stood and walked her to the door. The city lights outside glittered on the wet pavement from a light drizzle. He helped her into a cab, standing there for a moment before the door closed. He signed one last thing. "Thank you for tonight." She signed something back he didn't fully catch, but he smiled anyway. When the cab pulled away, he stood on the curb for a long while, letting the cool breeze brush his face. Back inside, Damien and Carter approached, slowly and sheepishly. "Edward," Damien started, hand halfway raised. "Before you say anything, Edward turned toward them, eyes still fixed on the departing cab, then looked at his friends with something between disbelief and amusement. "What did you just do to me?" Neither of them had an answer. But the look in Edward's eyes said it all. Whatever it was, They'd lit a match they couldn't put out. 3 days passed. Edward found himself standing in front of a mirror in his penthouse bedroom, shirt halfway buttoned, heart beating like he had a job interview with fate. He checked his collar, then checked it again. He didn't know why he was nervous. Maybe because he hadn't stopped thinking about her since that night. Her smile, the softness in her eyes when she laughed, the way she paid attention, not to his money or status, but to his effort, to the person behind the mask he'd worn for so long. He had sent her a message 2 days earlier. Short, respectful, honest. "I'd like to see you again, if that's okay." She had replied, "It is." Now he was on his way to her side of the city, an older neighborhood tucked away from the sleek high-rises of his world. Here, people walked dogs without leashes and said hello to strangers. His luxury car looked out of place on the narrow, tree-lined street. Still, he parked, exhaled, and stepped out. Lily lived in a modest but charming duplex with ivy crawling up one side and flower pots on every windowsill. The door opened before he even knocked. She was barefoot, wearing jeans and a loose gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a low bun. There was no pretense, no performance, just her. She smiled and signed. "You're early." He shrugged. Couldn't wait. She led him in. The apartment was small but warm, bookshelves overflowing, soft lighting, a framed quote above the kitchen that read, "Love is not something you hear, it's something you feel." He noticed a piano tucked against the wall. "You play?" he asked, then remembered, and signed the question instead. She smiled. "I used to. I can't hear it, but I remember how it felt." They sat on the floor instead of the couch. She brought out 2 mugs of tea and a box of cards. "Sign me this, a learning game for practicing sign language." They played for an hour, laughing every time Edward butchered a hand shape. She corrected him gently, sometimes touching his hands to guide him through a sign. The first time her fingers brushed his, he froze. She noticed, but said nothing. Just smiled. He stayed for hours. They talked about her work, how she taught children to sign, some of them deaf, some with special needs. She told him about the beauty of silence, how the world slowed down when you didn't have constant noise. "People rush too much," she signed. "They fill the air just to avoid the quiet. But the quiet tells the truth." Edward nodded. He understood. He'd spent years drowning in noise, meetings, pitches, interviews, music in his car, podcasts to fall asleep. He couldn't remember the last time he had just sat in silence with someone and felt completely whole. He stayed until after the sun had set. They stood at the door, the porch light bathing them in a soft amber glow. Neither moved. Finally, he raised his hands. "I don't know what this is yet, but I'd like to keep learning you." She didn't answer right away. Then, carefully, she signed something he didn't quite catch. His eyes furrowed. She smiled and reached for his hands, repeating it slowly. "So would I." And just like that, something wordless passed between them. A thread, invisible but real. She didn't kiss him goodnight. She didn't need to. Instead, she held his hand for a moment, then signed. "Next time, dinner at your place. You cook." He grinned. Challenge accepted. When he got back into his car, he didn't turn the music on. He didn't need to fill the silence anymore. It was already full. The air was still in the rooftop lounge of the Stanton Club, a place usually filled with swagger and noise, music, laughter, clinking glasses. But tonight, Damien and Carter sat in heavy silence, nursing untouched drinks, both staring out over the city as if searching for a way to undo time. It had been a week since the blind date, and they hadn't heard a single complaint from Edward. Not even a sarcastic jab. That, more than anything, unsettled them. "He's not even roasting us," Damien muttered, tapping his ring against the rim of his glass. "That's how I know this isn't just another girl." Carter was quiet for a moment, then said, "You saw the way he looked at her. Like she spoke some language the rest of us don't even have the alphabet for." Damien leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I thought it'd be funny," he said. "A little harmless payback. The guy's always complaining he wants a woman who sees the real him. So we gave him someone who literally couldn't hear the noise." And she turned out to be the only one who ever actually did. That night, Carter had rewatched the recording. At first for laughs. But the longer he watched it, the more it felt wrong. Invasive. Two souls reaching for one another in vulnerability, and there he was, watching like a peeping adolescent. He deleted the footage, thumb shaking over the screen. They hadn't told Edward the truth yet. That they had set the whole thing up. That they hadn't told him she was deaf on purpose. That they hadn't expected her to be real. They didn't expect him to become real, either. But tonight, it was going to come out. They had invited Edward to dinner. Not at the club, not at the office, but at Carter's apartment, where things always felt more human. No suits. No champagne. Just three friends and the weight of a truth long overdue. Edward arrived fashionably late, as always, but not in the way he used to. No swagger. No performance. He wore a navy sweater and jeans, his hair slightly tousled, as if he'd been too preoccupied to check a mirror. When he walked in, he was smiling, truly smiling, the kind of ease that only comes from knowing you are exactly where you're supposed to be in life. He sat down, accepted a drink, and waited. He knew. Not the details. But something. Carter cleared his throat. So, we owe you a bit of an explanation. Edward raised an eyebrow, amused. A bit. Damien groaned, and got up to pour himself another drink. It started as a joke, he said. We just thought you needed someone different. So, you arranged the date, Edward said, watching them closely. Without telling me she was deaf. Carter nodded slowly. We didn't think it would matter. Honestly, we didn't think it would work. Edward leaned back. And you watched it? They exchanged guilty glances. He shook his head and exhaled sharply through his nose. Not anger. Something closer to disbelief. You both really thought I'd just melt down? That I wouldn't have the decency to treat her like a human being. We underestimated you, Damien admitted. And her. Silence fell. Edward stood up and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the glowing tapestry of the city below. The lights blurred slightly as he blinked. When she told me she was deaf, he said, voice soft, I felt like the world stopped talking just so I could hear something for once. They said nothing. He turned to face them. She didn't ask about what I do. Not once. She didn't care about the car or the watch or the penthouse. She cared about whether I meant what I signed, whether I was listening without needing sound. Carter opened his mouth, then closed it. And for the first time, Edward continued, his voice firm, I realized I wasn't lonely because I was rich. I was lonely because I kept trying to find connection in the noisiest places. He paused, then added, You brought her into my life. Maybe not in the most honorable way. But you did. He walked back to the table and sat down. So, thank you. Carter blinked. You're not mad. Oh, I'm mad, Edward said, cracking a smile. But I'm also grateful. You two idiots accidentally handed me the best thing that's ever happened to me. Damien laughed nervously. So, does that mean we get to be best men at the wedding someday? Don't push it, Edward said. But the glint in his eye told them everything. Later that night, after the drinks were drained and the tension dissolved into brotherly banter, Edward checked his phone. A message from Lily waited. Did you tell them? He smiled and typed back. They confessed. I forgave. It's a good story now. A moment later, her reply came. It already was. And as he left the apartment and stepped into the cool night air, Edward felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Light. Whole. Free. Rain pattered softly on the wide glass panes of Edward's penthouse windows, turning the city lights into streaks of liquid gold and silver. The scent of garlic, rosemary, and lemon wafted through the open-plan kitchen, where Edward stood barefoot in front of the stove, apron tied clumsily around his waist, a wooden spoon in one hand and a set of hand-scribbled instructions in the other. He glanced between the recipe and the sauce simmering in the pan, then over his shoulder at the clock. 20 minutes. He still had time. It had been 2 weeks since the night his friends had confessed everything. And since then, his life had begun to change in quiet, powerful ways. Meetings still filled his days, contracts still needed signing, but the weight he always carried, of being measured by his worth, was slowly slipping off his shoulders. Because now there was Lily. She was different. Not because she was deaf, but because she never needed noise to make him feel heard. And tonight, she would be coming over for the first time. No driver. No staff. No catered meals. No walls. Just the two of them. He looked around his space with new eyes. The ultramodern design now felt impersonal. Cold. White leather, black granite, abstract art. Everything expensive. Everything sterile. So he had made changes. A bookshelf now stood against the far wall, filled with novels she'd recommended. A small stack of sign language books sat beside his coffee table. He'd bought them without telling her. Not because she expected it, but because he wanted to meet her where she lived, not just physically, but culturally. In her world, language didn't come from mouths. It came from hands, from eyes, from intention. The doorbell rang, one chime gentle. He took a breath, wiped his hands on the apron, and opened the door. She stood there with her usual grace, wearing a moss-green dress, hair tucked into a scarf, a canvas tote over one shoulder, and a small smile that made the entire skyline behind her fade into irrelevance. He signed, "Welcome." She responded, "Smells like you tried hard." He grinned. "I did try hard." She stepped in, eyes sweeping across the space. Her expression shifted with subtle surprise at the visible effort. The softer lighting, the absence of background music, the books, even the notepad waiting on the counter, though she rarely needed it anymore. She touched his arm gently and signed, "Thank you. You thought about this." "I think about you," he signed, more confident now. Dinner was a mess. The chicken was slightly overcooked. The sauce had separated. The salad was passable at best. But none of it mattered. They sat at the table by the window, rain tracing lines down the glass as they ate, laughed, and communicated, sometimes with hands, sometimes with notes, sometimes just with looks. Edward fumbled a few signs, made her laugh when he accidentally signed pineapple instead of promise, and she mimed a dramatic choking scene when she bit into a too spicy piece of chicken. He loved it. He loved her. Not because she was some symbol of simplicity or virtue. Not because she couldn't hear the noise of the world. But because she had taught him something no one else ever had. That connection didn't have to be loud to be deep. That vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was strength. And that silence, when shared with the right person, was the most profound language of all. Later, they moved to the couch. The city glowed beneath them, a living organism of movement and sound they both chose to ignore. She took off her scarf and leaned against him, curling her legs beneath her. They didn't talk for a long while. They didn't need to. He reached for her hand. Slowly, without rush, he signed, "I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. But when I'm with you, I stop looking for it." She didn't move for a moment. Then she turned to face him. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty. "You don't find love. You create it. And we're doing that. Right now." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, one by one, the way some long-forgotten part of his soul had always imagined doing for the right woman. Not for show. Not for seduction. Just as a silent act of devotion. When he walked her to the door that night, she paused before stepping into the hall. She turned, signed, "You're learning fast." He shrugged and replied, "Great teacher." Her smile widened. And before she turned away, she signed one more thing. "I like you in the quiet." He watched her walk away, a strange ache in his chest, gentle but certain. The kind of ache that only came when you were finally starting to understand what whole meant. Autumn came slowly, wrapping the city in a muted gold hush. Trees turned the color of fire, and the air carried the crisp scent of change. Edward and Lily had settled into a rhythm that felt less like a routine and more like a heartbeat, steady, unspoken, and essential. They no longer needed notepads. Edward's signing had improved dramatically. At first clumsy, now fluid. Not perfect, but sincere. He still paused often to think, to get it right. But that pause became something beautiful between them, a visible sign of effort, of intention, of care. Their relationship had grown in layers, like the rings of a tree, each moment adding quiet strength to the foundation beneath them. There were no grand declarations, no flashy headlines, no social media posts with filters or champagne bottles. Only dinners in silence, laughter without sound, and long nights tracing each other's fingers like sacred scripts. One night, he invited her to an event, a gala fundraiser for inclusive education, where Lily had once volunteered. She hesitated at first. Such events were often overwhelming, filled with flashing lights and echoing acoustics that turned the world into chaos. But Edward had planned everything. He arranged for a certified interpreter to be by her side. He spoke with the hosts to ensure captions were displayed for all speeches. He even added a quiet zone, a lounge space set away from the noise, with soft lighting and no music. When they arrived, she stood frozen for a moment at the top of the marble staircase, her fingers gently brushing his wrist. He signed, "I wanted you to feel seen. Not tolerated. Not accommodated. Included." Her eyes welled with tears. They didn't stay long at the gala. After a couple of speeches and a short walk through the donor hall, they left early. Not because she was uncomfortable, but because neither of them needed to be there. They already had everything they wanted. Weeks passed, and then, one evening, she returned to his penthouse after a trip to visit her family. She walked in to find the space transformed, not with opulence, but meaning. Candles lined the window ledge, flickering gently against the darkened glass. The bookshelf was now full, each title tagged with a little sticky note. Her favorite, she said this changed her life, need to ask her what she loved about this. On the coffee table, her favorite herbal tea steeped, the steam curling upward like a ribbon of anticipation. She turned to him. He stood in the middle of the room, no suit, no grand gestures. Just a man holding something behind his back. His hands trembled slightly. He signed slowly, deliberately. "You changed my life. You taught me how to listen. Not with ears, but with my heart." Then he revealed what he'd been holding. Not a box, not a ring, but a single piece of paper, handwritten in thick marker. "Will you marry me? I want a lifetime of quiet moments with you." Lily didn't move. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide, emotion rising in a swell that threatened to overwhelm her. She didn't cry, not at first. She walked to him, slowly, deliberately, took the marker from his hand, turned the paper over, and wrote 3 words in bold, clear strokes. "Yes, my love." Then she added one more sign, with a smile breaking through her tears. "Forever." Their wedding was not televised. There was no orchestra, no celebrity guest list. Just a garden, blooming in late spring. Friends, family, and silence. Not empty silence. Sacred silence. The vows were signed. Every gesture carried weight. The "I do" was not spoken aloud. It was mouthed and signed with hands held together, trembling. When the officiant declared them married, there was no roaring applause. Only the wind through the leaves. And the look in Edward's eyes as he kissed her. The kind of look that said everything sound could never capture. In the months that followed, Damien and Carter would often visit. They laughed together, now with a different energy, less sarcastic, more reverent. They never spoke of the prank again. Not because it was taboo, but because it no longer felt like a joke. It had become legend. They had set Edward up for a laugh, and ended up setting him free. On quiet mornings, Edward and Lily would sit by the window, legs tangled, tea cooling on the table. They didn't always sign. They didn't always touch. Sometimes they just watched the world move and chose not to move with it. No need for music. No need for words. Just the silent, steady beat of 2 hearts that had finally found home. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.